This is a nice size.
Not too long ago, it would have been almost impossible for General and Candace Sutton to buy a home without violating their faith. They are both devout Muslims who want to finance their new home by following Islamic law, known as Sharia, which forbids paying interest.
For us, religion and our faith is we like to incorporate it into every means of our life.
Islam is not just a religion, it's a way of life. So when you look at a way of life, you have, different ethical things that you should do, should not do. We're not supposed to be paying interest because that's not in our way of life.
The question.
Ibrahim Warday is a professor at Tufts Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. He teaches a class that's increasingly popular on Islamic banking and finance, and says it was the Prophet Muhammad, himself a merchant, who condemned the practice of charging or paying interest, called riba in Arabic.
There used to be a very common practice of riba, which was a periodic doubling of the interest. So in other words, if you owed money and were unable to pay it, then it'll have to be doubled, and the whole process would end with enslaving the debtor. So with the advent of Islam, there was an end to that practice.
Candace, who is a transportation engineer and General, a software developer, are looking for a home closer to work and closer to their mosque. The real estate agent is Roma El-Abashi, a Muslim himself who felt guilty about buying his own home through conventional financing.
I waited for a long time, and then I made a mistake. I bought a house with the regular financing, and I couldn't live with it, so I actually had to sell the house because of that reason. Taking advantage of somebody who needs money by charging them more money doesn't make sense.
He says it's not just Muslims who are inquiring about Sharia financing, it's non-Muslims as well, who share General Sutton's point of view.
A lot of the finance companies who are not taking interest, they don't seem to be as hurt as much as these other companies. And it's all driven by money. It's all about greed. You charge interest, you want more money, and that just leads to more things that leads to a bad path.
How much loan you are looking for?
This is Guidance Residential in Reston, Virginia, one of a growing number of companies catering to Muslim homebuyers by devising ways to finance mortgages without levying interest charges. Candace and General plan to finance their home through Guidance.
Right here. It's nice.
Here's how it works. Candace and General would make a qualifying down payment, and Guidance and the Suttons would then purchase the home as co-owners. But instead of charging interest, Guidance would assess a monthly tax-deductible fee. Hussam Qutub is the Director of Communications for Guidance, which has financed more than 5,000 home purchases since 2002.
Now, in that monthly payment portion, there are two elements. One is the acquisition portion of the payment, and the second is the charge.
The fee.
The fee. With every payment, the customer is increasing his or her shares in the property, and ours are decreasing. And at the same time, their fee over time is decreasing because we're owning less.
Professor Warday says skeptics who argue that the finance fee is really not much different than interest are missing the point.
The example I typically give is religiously inspired dietary rules, in that if some people don't want to eat food that is not halal or kosher, then a nutritionist can come to them and say, well, why are you doing that? But for these people, for religiously minded people, how the food is prepared is quite significant.
Assalamu alaikum. There are other significant differences. For instance, the late fee at Guidance is never more than $50. Sharia mortgage holders are also less likely to default on their payments.
If there's nothing else that you can do in terms of paying a debt, and you've tried your utmost to repay it, then the logic of the Sharia is that the losses should be shared by both the borrower and the lender. But it is definitely a sin to be able to repay and yet not to repay it.
But it would also be a sin for Guidance to foreclose on someone without trying to work things out.
If for some reason the property values, just as we're seeing today, decrease, and we're stuck with proceeds that are not even close to what we're owed on our share, we won't pursue our partner We won't pursue their savings accounts. We won't go after their personal assets.
One interesting statistic about Muslims in the U.S. is that although they tend to be wealthier than the average American, the rate of home ownership is lower. So most sociologists explain that in terms of some misgivings that Muslims might have about interest-based mortgages.
I've known a lot of friends who were just renting homes, and they were not comfortable because of the simple fact that they strongly had this feeling that this is definitely a sin to do when you're taking interest or even giving back interest.
What are you guys doing?
When Zulika Hussein and her husband and 4 kids were relocated to Northern Virginia, she was aware of Sharia financing, but her husband's company required that the family use conventional financing. Zulika decided to refinance the house the Sharia way so she could perform the 5th pillar of Islam, the pilgrimage to Mecca, with a clear conscience.
It's recommended that you are free of debt before you make that pilgrimage. That's why a majority of the Muslims prefer not to get into that particular situation. You owe somebody money, so you want to make sure that you're debt-free before you go and spend that extra money to go to a pilgrimage.
Zulika's problem is that her beautiful home has lost so much value, Guidance won't refinance unless she can put down more cash, which for her and many other Americans is not readily available. Sharia finance companies are almost always more conservative than their conventional counterparts. Sharia-compliant financing is now moving beyond home mortgages to investments in things like mutual and equity funds. For the past 10 years, there's been a Dow Jones Islamic Market Index where investment opportunities are monitored to see that they comply with Sharia law. Islamic market investors, it turns out, have not been hit as hard as conventional investors in the current economic meltdown.
Sharia-compliant mutual funds do not invest in is financial institutions. And given the collapse in the value of financial institutions in the last couple of years, Islamic mutual funds have done quite well, which is also one reason why many non-Muslims have been attracted to Islamic mutual funds.
The Dow Jones Islamic Index also excludes investments in things like gambling, alcohol, cigarettes, pornography, and pork, as well as companies that are highly leveraged or that have shown ethical lapses.
Certainly there was an incredible amount of speculation, incredible amount of unknowns and risks were taken. And that is something that we know in Islam is really heavily prohibited, where you are in essence almost gambling. And gambling is something that is not permissible in Islam.
Islamic financing has been growing at an annual rate of 10 to 15%, but Professor Warday says there is no guarantee that Islamic investments will always be a hedge against losing money.
It's also important not to look at Islamic finance as a panacea or as anything miraculous, in that in the Persian Gulf region, especially in places like Dubai right now, there's been a sharp drop in real estate prices. And I'm pretty sure that in the next few months we'll hear about some Islamic banks losing money because a lot of their loans are tied up with the real estate market.
But for Muslims like Zulika, Sharia-compliant financing is about more than money.
I feel like God's showing me, hey, I'm giving you this opportunity to refinance. I'm giving you this opportunity to see that this is out there for you. So when I do go and perform the pilgrimage, I'll feel very good about myself that I have completed all the tasks that I needed to do.
Sharia financing and investments are still only a tiny portion of the financial market, but growing. For Religion and Ethics News Weekly, I'm Lucky Severson in Ashburn, Virginia.